really appreciate you joining today. It is going to be a great conversation. So we do a legislative update and a tech policy overview. This is our second year in a row, and it's been very helpful and important for the tech ecosystem, for our community. And so we're really grateful to have two unbelievable speakers today. We have Sheela VanHoose from the Southern Group, and also too, Sheela is the chair of the K through 12 talent subcommittee. So she's a rock star, and another rock star is Merdoche LaFrance. So Merdoche is the state and government lobbyist for Verizon. Merdoche also sits on our policy committee as well. So we are both very grateful for them to be here today, especially during session. This is a very, very busy time, as you guys will see in the presentation, because the Florida legislature does not meet year-round. So it is a very short time that it's possible. So we are very grateful to them for taking time out of their really busy schedule to be here. We will be jumping into the meat of the discussion really quickly, but for those of you that aren't familiar with Tech Hub, we do a brief little overview at the beginning of each webinar and virtual event so that you have the ability to see what Tech Hub is all about. So we have different core initiatives and missions throughout Tech Hub, and the main mission is to increase and build the tech ecosystem and continue to build upon the exciting things that are going on throughout the region. We do represent Miami-Dade County, Broward County, Palm Beach County, and Martin County as well. So as you can see here, we break this up into different categories. So talent is a major component of what Tech Hub represents and what I do in a day-to-day perspective. So I am Ashton Adler. I'm the Director of Talent and Policy for Tech Hub. So we work with K through 12 higher education and boot camps to promote a short-term and long-term strategy for the amazing talent that we do have in South Florida and connecting them to the industry. Next up, we have brand. So really getting that identity out there is another critical component of Tech Hub. So from a branding perspective, what we really try to do is not just have narrowed in visions of what South Florida is. So a lot of the times you'll hear just Miami or just Fort Lauderdale or just Palm Beach or just Stewart. And what we want to do is represent from a global and an outside perspective that we're really all one and that the whole region is doing something amazing. For community, we have, it's really important for us to connect everyone and create those established connections. And then two, specifically from a startup perspective, really helping startups to launch, to get visibility is a major component as well. We do also, fortunately, have a wide array of members. We have the enterprise and industry members that you can see just a highlight here of some of those. We have over 275 member organizations from a company perspective, but also too, you have the ability to join as an individual that will give you access to events, committees, and all sorts of things. Okay, so jumping into the information that is extremely important, that's going on and very critical for what's happening right now over the next 60 days, I will go ahead and turn it over to our panelists, Sheela VanHoose and Merdoche LaFrance.
Well, thank you, Ashton, and thank you for organizing today's conversation to all those who are on the phone with us today and those who will watch us back later, depending on when you watch it. This could be really relevant information or, you know, maybe a little outdated because we are in the 9-week stretch of our legislative session. And so it is a constant evolving. Every day is something different. This week, budgets have started to roll out. Week 3 has come to a close and budgets have started to roll out, and that'll be kind of sucking up most of the wind over the next couple weeks. But I'm going to just pause for a moment because I said hello, but I do want to allow Merdoche to say hello as well. So I'm going to pause.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Ashton. Thank you for everyone that's on. I'll introduce myself again, Merdoche LaFrance, proud Director of Local Engagement in Southeast and Southwest Florida for Verizon. And I am incredibly happy to be here. And just like Sheila said, don't know if this will be played back, later on or when it'll be played back, but hopefully this information won't be too outdated. And again, want to echo what Sheila said. We're super happy to be here and hope that you all are able to get, at least something from this wonderful Lunch and Learn. And I'll turn it back over to Sheila.
Thanks, Merdoche. And then for everyone else, I'm Sheela VanHoose with the Southern Group, where I lead our education practice, but I've spent the last little over a decade in the education space, particularly working for Broward County Public Schools, Charter Schools USA. More recently, before joining the Southern Group, I was with code.org working on computer science policy. So kind of always been in the education policy arena, but really at that intersection between tech and education. So let's dive into learning about a little bit of an introduction to Florida legislature. For some of you, this might be kind of new information, but ideas become laws. And so this is the structure. We have 160 members of the legislature in Tallahassee, 40 senators, 120 representatives. So it's 40 senators in the upper chamber, 120 representatives in the lower chamber. They're elected to different terms. So you can see here, I'm not going to read off the slide, but 4-year terms in the Senate, 2-year terms in the House. And right now, Republicans have a majority in both the House and Senate, a supermajority in both the House and Senate, including the Florida cabinet, which is the governor, attorney general, commissioner of agriculture, and the, did I say attorney general? And the attorney general. And the CFO, sorry, missed the financial person, the person who is all about the money, right? And the CFO of the state of Florida. That's a little bit of our structure of state government. A lot of times we maybe are more acutely aware of our school board members or our city and county commissioners, members on a hospital commission or a water district, because that is in our neighborhoods, people we run into at the grocery store. But these members are setting state policy. They determine the budget, the money that flows down to our local governments and to our local schools. And so let's go ahead, Ashton, and go to the next slide. So we wanted to share with you, and let's do a fun exercise before we get there. So I want you to think of what is the best cookie in the world? I know, tough question, and Girl Scout season just came to an end. Best cookie in the world. Go ahead. If you are with us live right now, feel free to drop it in the chat. Your favorite cookie, Merdoche, I don't know what your favorite cookie is. Mine is just a really nice, warm chocolate chip cookie. Got to stick with a classic. Let's see, anyone throwing some chats in there? Oh, okay. Chocolate chip, oatmeal. Okay. Oatmeal raisin. Jeff, I'm just going to put out there. That is not a cookie. That's like, there's fruit in it. Does not count. I love it. So what you always love this Panera's kitchen sink. Now that's a very specific cookie to mention. So what I love about this really fun exercise, and I do this a lot with students and sometimes even parent groups, but the reality is we all have a different opinion of what the best cookie is. And some of us can get into a real argument and debate over what the best cookie is. It seems trivial. Our members of the legislature, come from all different walks of life, and they are given problems across the state that we all have to face, and they have to come up with solutions. And we have 160 different solutions to some of the problems that we all face. And so I always love doing that fun exercise just to remind us that we all come from different backgrounds, different lenses, and we have a different way of approaching problems, as much as we have a different fun flavor to our favorite cookies there. So, when we think of that, and we always want to share how you can get an audience with your members of the legislature, a lot of it comes down to being able to educate members, right? So for our members here at Tech Hub, you all have a very specific background in your different companies. And when you have a member of the legislature, maybe they were a teacher, maybe they were an attorney, they don't know every aspect of every single silo. No one of us would know that. And so we always want to say, find members, when you decide who you're going to meet with, are you meeting with someone based on geography because they represent Broward, Palm Beach, and Miami-Dade, and you want to educate them on your issues or share with them the great work you are doing? Do you want to find someone who's maybe like Representative Gina Lombardo on the West Coast of Florida, who is a tech guy and understands our issues a little bit more intimately, and kind of prep him on some of the problems that we're seeing, the hurdles you're running into, so that he can be a better advocate. There's all different reasons of why you would choose someone to meet with, to turn them into an advocate. But first, when we're deciding and setting up meetings with legislators, it's always first doing a little bit of a strategy, right? Who should we meet with? We want to schedule those meetings in advance. So we always recommend scheduling in advance. Right now, we have lots of folks showing up to Tallahassee during committee meetings and session, and they are just walking up to members' offices and saying, can I get 15 minutes with your member? And it's really hard. As much as we, I know members would love to meet with people all day long. They have meetings, they have other pre-scheduled items. So if you happen to be in Tallahassee, because we know a lot of folks, this week was Broward Day, so all of our friends from Broward County was up. A couple weeks back was Palm Beach County Days. I think Miami-Dade Days is coming up. So if you happen to be in Tallahassee, I would recommend reaching out to members in advance, seeing if you can get 10, 15 minutes. You probably won't get more than that with them at this point in time, to sit down and share with them a little bit about your organization, your company, what you're working on. And be respectful. I always say be respectful. We all have different opinions. We all have a hard job to do. We want to be respectful with that time we have with those members. And then just kind of to level set, because we are in the middle of session. If you are bringing a new problem to a member, there's not much they probably will be able to do with that today, because session has already moved. Bill filings have ended. Budgets are rolling out. But that doesn't mean a member can't think about it, work with you, come up with a solution for the following session. Merdoche, anything you want to add to the kind of initial conversation about meeting with members?
I completely agree with you. If you're traveling to Tallahassee, never just show up. I know sometimes, you can't always anticipate when you're traveling, but because it is Tallahassee and the members, they absolutely want to meet with, especially with their constituents and any, particular issues that they're really interested in. But if you can schedule those meetings in advance, that would be absolutely amazing. And I'll say this too, even though we do have a Republican supermajority, and I know that sometimes, politics gets really partisan and trivial. For me, and I know that Sheela can say the same, you will never meet a legislator who isn't willing to meet with you, isn't willing to learn about the issues, especially something that you're passionate about, and willing to talk to you. I've been prior to my role at Verizon and a few other roles, I actually used to be on the other side and used to be a staffer. And probably one of the joys of my life was when, groups and constituents and young folks used to come up to the Capitol to try to lobby or advocate for issues that they were really passionate about. So completely agree with everything that Sheela just said. But more importantly, scheduling in advance is your best friend.
100%. Something also that people don't always think about is sometimes the members are not available. And Ashton, I'll let you switch to the next slide, because I don't know if this was on the slide. I know we kind of covered the same material. The beginning part of this presentation is the same year over year. But sometimes we want to make sure that you also know that another great person to meet with, if you're the legislator you wanted to meet is not available, is their staff. So their legislative aide or chief of staff would also be an incredible person to meet with. Be respectful to that individual. It's a lot of times I have folks who say, they look like they can be they just came out of college. Like, how much can they really do? And let me tell you, these legislative staffers are so powerful. A lot of times I'm meeting with staffers to help me, especially if I'm working on an amendment. I want to add a comma into a bill, into a policy. They're the ones who are drafting it. So please don't feel that if you have an opportunity to meet with a staffer, or if a legislator ends up having to cancel and you're meeting with legislative staff on either the House or Senate, please know that those folks sit right there at the right seat of their member, and they are incredibly influential into this process. Okay. So next is getting noticed. So, we talked about, just for those of you who are coming up to Tallahassee, how to set up meetings, things to think about, but also think about issues that matter to legislators. So is your member, you want to find that connection point. So the legislator you're meeting with, all of their bios are online. Take a look. Is the member you're meeting with represent your district? Can you talk about your company, right? They represent the district your company is based in that neighborhood. And you want to be able to talk to them about a company in their hometown. Or maybe they sit on an economic development committee and you want to talk to them about economic development incentives. There's some alignment on the policy that they're interested in. Or it could be, like I mentioned, Representative Gina Lombardo, it could be someone's background. That they understand those issues. Or maybe it's a Representative McFarland who has been kind of on the forefront of technology bills over the last couple of years. So hot issues as well. So think about those things and do your research. There's plenty of websites. The My Florida House and Florida Senate websites have a ton of information, from every single bill that's filed to member bios, what committees they sit on. It is a wealth of information. I'll pause. Merdoche?
Yeah, want to echo everything that Sheela just said. Also look at, and I know Sheela mentioned this, but their committee assignments. So you may find there's a legislator that maybe has a background in banking. And so it follows that the Speaker of the House would assign that member to the, banking and regulated industries, subcommittee. But definitely, in addition to their bios, look at their committee assignments. Speaking of Representative Gina Lombardo, I know that both he and Representative Botana, Senator Jonathan Martin, all of whom represent Southwest Florida, all sit on the new Resiliency Committee. And Senator Martin, of course, was appointed by, President Pasadomo. And so you have the Speaker in the House who collaborate a lot of times to ensure that, here in Florida, we have the best quality of life. So again, want to reiterate, do your homework, understand, where the backgrounds of a lot of the legislators, what their interests are, but also what committees they sit on, because that may also govern, how they respond to you about a particular issue, or even issues that maybe you might not think that they're interested in, but they are, because either they have the background, they have the interest, or they sit on the respective committee.
And we did talk about a lot of this stuff already. Thank you, Sheela and Merdoche, for speaking about this in advance. But there are a couple of quick things in there, like leaving behind your business card and one page leave behind. That can be really great. But if there's anything else that you would like to add, Merdoche and Sheela, thank you for being all-stars and proactively answering a lot of these things as well. But if there's anything else that you want to add, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, I think it's just summarizing that whole section, that first part of this conversation. We just wanted to just share with you, because we know a lot of people, we're hearing a lot of our members are coming up to Tallahassee over the next couple of weeks. And so we just wanted to share, schedule meetings ahead of time, come in, level set expectations. You might end up meeting with legislative staffers, especially now that session is completely underway and members are, on the floor. You might only get 10 minutes. Sometimes now you might only get 5 minutes. And then if you're bringing a new problem, it might have to wait till next session. Those are kind of level setting of expectations. But listen, we are in session every single year. And so there's plenty of time to really work on your issues.
Sheela, I love that. I'll add too, I think it's also helpful for you to not just come with an issue, but come with a solution. So a lot of times you'll find folks like Sheela and I either in committee meetings or watching committee meetings that happened to see, what some of the legislators, what their thoughts are, or their particular opinions about certain issues. Because if you can imagine, if you're meeting with a legislator and you're bringing them a particular issue you're interested in, multiply yourself times 100 to understand the volume of special interests, community leaders, et cetera, that are coming to meet with them in their respective offices in Tallahassee during session and or committee weeks. But if let's say there's a particular committee meeting where you watched and they said something that might have piqued your interest, jarring their memory back to that might be a great way for you to kind of stand out. So again, do your research, don't forget to really try to connect with legislators, because at the end of the day, I mean, forget the partisan titles, they're people, right? And if you think of yourself, or you put yourself in their respective, places, and think about yourself professionally, whatever, space you're in, if you have direct reports, how do your direct reports, how do they stand out? What are some of the things that really matter to you? And so you kind of adapt that to the legislator. They have so much on their plates. And by statute, to be honest with you all, they're only required to do one thing, right, Sheela? And that's to pass a budget. All the bills that they pass are extra.
That's just for fun.
Yeah, it's just for fun. They're only required to pass a budget. That is it. So all of the other bills that you hear about are, of course, to increase and improve our quality of life in Florida. So I'll stop there so we can keep going, but excellent dialogue and conversation so far.
Yeah, and I know as we move into the next slide, Merdoche, I'd love for you to share with all of our friends on the line, and those who will watch this back later recording, why is it important for companies to pay attention to the process? Like, why does Verizon pay attention to the process, and why does Verizon have a government relations team with you on it that is engaged in what's happening?
Well, I guess it's the perfect segue, because I see that Ashton has the why is state legislation important for your company slide up, which is fantastic. So as you can imagine, whether you're a public-private entity, legislation and the incredible representatives and leaders in Tallahassee, everything that they do impact not just the quality of life, but also what governs our businesses, right? Legislation, if you look at some of the committees, there's regulated industries, there's healthcare, there's education appropriations, and we're, I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but our legislative body governs not just things that are considered public good, right? So water, education, etc., but they also govern industries, right? And telecommunications, of course, Verizon happens to be a regulated industry, as is the finance industry, et cetera. So for those of us in Florida that own homes, if you think about the insurance crisis we're in right now, the legislature for many years has been trying to figure out like how to make insurance palatable for homeowners, right? And if they didn't think about what could happen if there wasn't some sort of regulation. And so for me, I can speak, particularly for Verizon and probably some others, it's important for us to get active, because Sheela mentioned this before, there are legislators who bring to bear their experiences, but also bring to bear, things that they may not necessarily know about. So while a legislator may bring legislation with which they're really familiar with and might sponsor legislation, they don't just have an interest in that. They also have to vote on and speak about and talk about and opine on legislation that they might not know anything about, because the total bodies, the 120 and the 40, they're voting on state bills all the time during the 60-day session. So it's important for companies like mine and others to get involved, because there may be a particular bill that may or may not harm business practices for my particular company. And I know, as we move on, we're going to talk about a few bills, including cybersecurity, data privacy, all of those things, impact in some way or another telecommunications companies. And I'm sure, of course, Sheela's going to talk about social media bills and things that have been filed that impact education. So it's really important for companies to get involved, because number one, it helps you to be engaged and involved in the legislative process, but it also provides, believe it or not, legislators an opportunity to view you as a thought leader and a resource, which is invaluable.
Yeah, so incredibly powerful to be able to share your story and your perspectives and make some really good changes to state law. I think the next section of this presentation, Ashton, are we moving into some bills? Yes, we are moving into some bills of interest. And by all means, if you have questions, you can pop them into the chat and we'll answer them. And then for those who are watching this recording afterwards, we'll make sure to leave our contact information so you can reach out to either one of us to ask your question, and we'd be happy to kind of guide you and share a little bit more with you. So let's start with some education legislation that is of interest, because I know we all have an interest, and it's a really big, education is a really big portion of Tech Hub South Florida. It's one of our tenants. We focus a lot on our workforce development because we want to think of workforce for our entire ecosystem, which means we need to think of K-12 education and higher ed, apprenticeship programs, and we do a ton of that. So let me just do a plug real fast for our talent and workforce committees. If you are a member of Tech Hub South Florida and would like to serve, would like to be a part of the conversation, these committees meet on a monthly basis, and they are constantly and consistently talking about how Tech Hub South Florida and our members can continue to support teachers in the classroom, continue to support students, again, from K-12 to post-secondary and even beyond, as we think of reskilling and retooling workforce. That is my plug for today. Ashton, see, check the box. I did it. And I wasn't even asked to. So thinking of some education legislation of interest, as we think about some of the problems and solutions legislators received, the first two the first two branches of bill. So every bill has a House bill and a Senate bill. If you're not familiar with the bill process, we probably can spend another meeting just talking about how a bill becomes law and the process that follows through the session. But a bill has to have a House bill and a Senate bill, companion bills for the most part, and they work through the process. They go through several committee meetings where members in a subcommittee will debate them, discuss them, amend them, multiple stops along the way before they each go into their respective chamber in the House floor and the Senate floor for a full committee vote, right? That's where all 40 senators vote, all 120 House members vote, if they're present that day, vote on all those bills on both sides. So you need a bill to pass in identical form in both committees. If it's amended on the floor in one committee, it has to bump to the next chamber to be amended and voted on until that happens. Once we have identical bills, they are then sent to the governor's office to potentially be signed into law or to be vetoed. So that's why in some of these you'll see two bills because there is two different languages moving. So in the early learning space, there's two interesting bills that around technology, House Bill 1021 and Senate Bill 990. They prohibit the use of technology in the classroom for early learning students. So think of our itty bitties in preschool, 3 and 4-year-olds. They would be unable to use technology in the classroom. Now, the genesis of why the intent behind this bill is to encourage more instruction time versus preschools acting maybe more in a babysitting fashion and putting on a YouTube video and just letting kids watch cartoons all day long. We want them to learn the tenets of literacy and mathematics and, learn by play, right? So that is the intent behind the bill, but the prohibition would be no devices in the classroom, with the exception of when students have their progress monitoring. So being able to use an incredibly backed program, maybe something that's scientifically backed, research backed, a program that's going to help students learn literacy. I immediately, as a mom of a 4-year-old, think of like 6 different programs that my daughter used to play with that really did help her learn her counting, her ABCs, in addition to my incredible at-home teaching in the early learning space. Similar, and Ashton, you're going to be going through that now too with a little one at home. In the K-8 space, right? So this is House Bill 1463 and Senate Bill 620. It's the similar language, but the prohibition is from kindergarten until 8th grade. So that is elementary school and middle school. And if you think about in middle school, we have a ton of career and technical education programs. We really advocate for industry certification starting in middle school across the state of Florida. And so this prohibition would limit the amount of instructional time that can be on a device to 10%. So no more than 10%. Schools are using devices, textbooks on devices, right, to streamline textbooks. They're using devices to create different learning paths because all students learn differently. If you are in a classroom, maybe you're more advanced and you need to be challenged. Maybe you're not understanding the material, you need someone to help bring you up. And so we use devices to kind of create those individualized learning paths, all different ways, and for assessments, all different ways bills are being used. So I will tell you, so we have these two kind of device ban bills. In the early learning space, the bills are just now starting to move and having conversations and hearings at this halfway point in session. In the K-8 space, we are not seeing those bills move, but they have been filed and the conversation has begun, but the bills are not moving. So we'll continue to monitor those. Other bills is bills like Senate Bill 52, which is around social media. Actually, it says no cell phones, no mobile devices in the classroom. Students will not be able to have them out. They cannot be on social media during the day. School districts have to really consider locking down social media sites on their Wi-Fi networks. And there should be some type of curriculum designed to teach students the impacts of social media on their lives. So that's a social media ban bill that is moving through the process pretty well. Protection of data, student data is Senate Bill 669, and you'll see the HB and SB. I guess I didn't really explain. Senate bill, that's the Senate version. HB is House bill, the House version. The data protection bill is really focused around how data is shared. Student data is shared with third parties, and that bill as well is moving through the process. I think next we're going to move into some technology bills of interest. And so some of those Merdoche, I don't know if there's you wanted to cover anything in particular, but I'm going to just pause there real fast.
No, that's exactly right. And I want to reiterate too, if you all have any questions at all, please place them in the chat. Obviously, Sheela and I will answer if we can. But just touching on some of the tech legislation right now, 3 major bills. The first is HB 1511, so House bill, as Sheela just said. When you see SB and HB, so House bill, and then SB, Senate bill. You may also see some variations of CS, so that's committee substitute, or committee bill, CB. So just to look out for those. So the cybersecurity bill formalizes our approach to information technology. So if any of you are familiar with the state of Florida, right now we have a rock star CIO, Jamie Grant, who used to be a former representative, really active on in the tech space, and the governor, recognized his abilities and his experience and decided to appoint a CIO. Senate bill, House Bill 1511 formalizes that process within the Department of Management Services so that we can address growing cybersecurity threats. So of course, between, COVID and us becoming increasingly digital, there's a need obviously for the state to, ensure that we have infrastructure, digital and otherwise, to ensure that our state is secure and our state is safe. Obviously, there's a lot of information, a lot of data, because the state, has a lot of programs, entitlement programs and other things, state education programs. If you think about colleges and universities, there's a lot of data there with students, financial aid, et cetera. And so obviously our legislature, wants to ensure that we have the infrastructure in place to address any threats of cybersecurity. The bill is pretty long because it designates a CIO, it designates how that person is selected. There's also the creation of a data center. There's a lot going on in the bill. So if you want to read more, you're welcome to. House Bill 563 is the applications on government devices. And Sheela and I had talked about this briefly, but basically it would require the Department of Management Services to create a list of prohibited applications defined by the Department of Management Services to present as a security risk in the form of unauthorized access. So obviously what this basically means is any government device, cell phone or otherwise, computer, laptop, iPad, tablet, etc., won't be able to have access to certain platforms. And I'll just leave it there because this is recorded. And then transparency in tech, Senate Bill 262 is what we like to call the privacy bill. And so it basically creates a unified scheme to allow Florida's consumers to control the digital flow of their information. But this is with specific tech companies. So what it sort of does is provides consumers with the ability to control the access of their personal information. They can delete or correct their personal information. And then finally, they can opt out of the sale or sharing of their personal information. So again, really comprehensive bill that is going through the state legislature at this time. Privacy is that transparency in tech. So when we talk about privacy, that's exactly it. It's giving consumers the right to control what certain platforms and companies have access to when you opt in and opt out. So if you think about your cell phone and the number of applications that you download on your phone, the permissions that you provide to have access to those. That's what the privacy bill is seeking to address, excuse me. And then, of course, there's also an interest in foreign policy. And Sheela, I'd love for you to opine here. As you all know, if you're paying attention to any news, obviously the CEO of TikTok was on the Hill yesterday, as a matter of fact. I haven't watched this morning to see if he's going to be back in, but there's a huge conversation going on in our country about foreign interference and what it means to be on social media platforms. So I would just maybe recommend to you all, if you're interested in tech or legislation, just pay attention to what's going on, because it will obviously govern a lot of things. As you all know, there's a lot that you can do on social media, everything from securing influencers to take the place of traditional marketing your products and services, securing customers. There's just a lot going on. And so we know specifically that in terms of foreign policy, TikTok is not in a US company. And so that's why the interest in foreign policy is there. Just like Verizon's a multinational company, which means we operate in several countries. And so there are different laws that we have to abide by in different countries. And we do that par excellence, might I add. I will stop there. I know I said a lot. I think Ashton put something in the chat that I haven't seen yet, but open to Sheela opining on the foreign policy bill as well as privacy.
Well, I was just checking. Oh, Ashton asked a question that says, how does it look? Does it seem like there is traction with Senate Bill 262? I'm pulling it up right now because unfortunately I don't remember, there's over.
No, I can opine. So yes, Ashton, there does, it's a priority for the governor. And so in as much as it is, I imagine that that 262 will be moving quite quickly. And I'm sorry, I don't have offhand what the House bill, the companion bill is at this time, but yes, Ashton, it does seem like there will be great traction on 262.
Yeah, it looks like the House bill might be 1547 by McFarland that is also moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think when I think of all the legislation, I always wonder if for those who are not involved as much in legislation, what might be something that kind of stood out to you? If you want to drop that in the chat. I initially think, folks are sometimes surprised by what they maybe read in the paper, and then some of the bills that are actually moving and how it might impact your business or future workforce. Sometimes policy is not sexy, and it doesn't, it might not be something that comes across your news feeds. But it very much has an impact on your organization. Another thing some folks often share is that they didn't realize how much is actually regulated, and how far things can create policy and regulate. And Merdoche, I think you said it really nicely in the beginning, like policy is there to improve our way of life. And I feel like you said it so much better and used more words. And now I can't remember. Oh, I should have wrote it down. It was great. I was like, I need to say that to people in the future about the beauty of policy making.
That's exactly what it is. Because if you think about it in any other way, you might get mired and go down a rabbit hole that's quite unnecessary. Because at the end of the day, and you actually said this, Sheela, so I'll attribute this to you and Ashton. All of our representatives, the 120 and the 40, right? They were elected by their respective constituents in their respective communities because they had appeal. Their communities trust them to represent them on a state level. And so because that is the case, and we know that to be the case, in my mind at least, I trust that legislators have the best interest of Floridians in mind. Obviously, I think they're a lot more niche than that because they represent their respective communities. And so you'll see a lot of their policies and the things that they care about are germane to the communities where they live and work and play and serve. But for the most part, everyone, the 160 in total, including the cabinet, they were elected to make life better. And so if you approach policy in that way, I think you'll be able to find a lot more common ground.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to remember everyone can have a voice in this process. Merdoche and I our jobs are to lobby the legislature and local government. So Merdoche represents her company, right? She represents Verizon in the interest of Verizon. I'm representing multiple different client issues and interest before the legislature. And so that's our every single day, every day we're talking about bills, we're talking about budget, we're talking about changes in policy, how politics affects. But your members, your legislators, they want to hear from you, especially those that where your company is based, the members that represent your districts, being able to have a story that relates back to a company in their district really is helpful to them when they're fighting for policy, good or bad, right? They might be trying to stop a bad bill, or they might be trying to advocate for a bill, and having a story that relates directly to a company that impacts their stakeholders really moves mountains. And so I never want to scare people away from the process. There's a lot happening and it moves very fast. We are a sprint. Some states, it takes them 12 months to get through session. We do it in 60 days. We sprint to the finish line for sure. And we definitely need oxygen by the time we are done, because it is exhausting. But I encourage everyone to pay attention and to get involved.
I agree. And obviously Sheela doesn't know that I'm about to do this, but so for me, I'm on the government affairs team of a particular entity or business. But for those of you who maybe have some trepidation about the legislative process, that is why folks like Sheela and her firm exist. It's because they have proven themselves beyond a shadow and reasonable doubt that they are and I want to capitalize the subject matter experts in their respective fields. And so while, obviously Sheela didn't provide her full bio, but one of the reasons why she's such a rock star in education and education policy is because she has a background that boasts as much, right? And so if you have some trepidation, or you're like, you know what, I don't know how to get, my feet wet, maybe it is prudent for you to hire a lobbying firm, which represent your interests in Tallahassee. That's exactly why they exist. And so while I certainly don't want to dissuade anyone from traveling, I do want to make mention that that's the reason why lobbying firms exist. It's because regular folks, organizations, nonprofits, universities, state universities, cities, counties, everyone trusts these wonderful experts and subject matter experts because they know exactly what they're doing. They know the issues. And not only that, but they have relationships. So trust folks like Sheela, because she's a rock star.
Well, I wasn't expecting that, but I appreciate that. Merdoche, somebody put into the chat, and it'd be interesting to get your perspective of this, but in terms of legislative trends, Tal writes, are we becoming less pro-tech business? And I know some of the legislation we showed maybe lends to a feeling of being less pro-tech, but I'd love to get your perspective if you feel that way. Actually, as you see, not only the bills that are on the table today, the bills that have come through the process, the intent and the implementation of that.
That's a great point. And I hope I'm not mispronouncing Tall. I hope that I'm not mispronouncing that, but that's a great observation. I would say to look at everything with a grain of salt. I'll say this, I think traditionally legislatures are pro-business, and we hope so because we help to sort of drive the economy where we are. But I think what's happening, what you're seeing, is a response to a lot of the social challenges that we're having, right? Technology is a great equalizer. If you think of some of the things that you've either seen on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram from countries that don't necessarily have the infrastructure, but somehow, some way, folks were able to get their hands on a cell phone and some sort of tower that provides that coverage, you're able to see things that you normally wouldn't see. And so while technology has been the great equalizer and is absolutely amazing, there are also some bad actors out there that have leveraged it for not so good purposes, right? And so a lot of the data privacy and the social media bills that you're seeing is because there are a lot of implications that would provide cause for concern. I'll mention this. A few years ago, I don't know if you all remember, but unfortunately, there were some young people that were on Facebook Live. I can think of at least 2 instances in which these young folks were being bullied, and unfortunately and regrettably took their lives. And not only did that, but they did that on very public platforms. It's also, I think, a cry for help from parents who don't necessarily know the ins and outs of social media. However, their children that they're raising in their homes are more impacted by social media platforms than they are their own rearing in their own homes. And I think like I said, I think it's the legislators, whether they're on the federal, state, or local level, their ability or their attempt at least to try to protect kids. Because that's hard. I mean, I'm not a parent, but certainly Sheela and Ashton can speak to this. But if you're a parent, or like me, I'm a proud auntie of 3 amazing nephews and nieces. I have concern about their access. I have concern about what they see online and what can provoke them to change their behavior. And so, for me, I'm looking at this as glass half full. And so, it's an opportunity for me as a legislative. As a government affairs professional and expert within Verizon, to educate lawmakers about what our perspectives are and how we can keep children safe without necessarily encroaching on the rights and the freedoms of the free enterprise world. So
it's such a good point, Merdoche. And I think like the other thing is we're trying to sometimes create policy to solve a problem that's today we're facing.
Right.
We're also trying to create policy and to solve problems that we don't even know, like down the road, right? We're trying to prevent.
Exactly.
And that's hard to do, like to look into the crystal ball and say, where is this going? And how can we protect, Floridians? And what's the next evolution of that? What do we need to stop today so that something else doesn't happen? And so it's a lot of, estimation and guessing at times too.
Yeah. And to your point, Sheela, how not to make that prohibitive. Because if you're not a business owner, let's say you're a mom, and you're not in the business world, but your goal is to protect your kid, you might be completely blind to the implications that legislation or potential legislation might have on a business, right? And so that's why I said it's a joy of mine to be in this position, because it means I get to educate legislators on how a particular bill might be prohibitive or detrimental to my business. But, and it might be, and a lot of times it's something that legislators probably didn't necessarily consider. But that's where we come in, right? As normal citizens, as professionals that have that subject matter expertise to be able to go in and say, hey, this is how this bill might impact my business. And more often than not, you'll find legislators on either side of the aisle that are willing to to compromise with you through the editing, not editing, but through the revisions of bills and things like that. So a lot of times the way that bills start, if you look at them by the end of session, at the end of the 60 days, right, Sheela, because we talked about sprint to the 60, they sometimes look completely different,
right,
than they did when they first started. And that's because the bill sponsors, whether on the House or Senate side, have taken in or have considered a lot of the feedback that they've gotten along the way, the committee process, and hearing it on the floor.
Exactly. Now we have 2 more questions, and I know we're coming down to the last 6 minutes. So, but I think they kind of tie together a little bit. So Jean asks, how is the conversation with the public? Do legislators have a channel to have organization feedback on the bills? And Jean, what I would say is that it depends on the members. Some members, they rely on their stakeholders, reading something and sending something to them. They look at social media, they receive phone calls in their offices, they read emails, but for the most part, I don't think there is a formalized process where all members, all 160, are following some type of formalized process to solicit feedback, if that is what you're asking. That I don't think exists. But some members have newsletters that they send out, bills that they've sponsored that they want to share with their voters and their constituents and stakeholders. The other question that Tal asked is how technically educated are legislators? And I know we've kind of talked about that a little bit, which is, Merdoche, you want to take that? 160 members, 160 backgrounds?
Oh, wow, that's a good. I would say this, unless a particular legislator has an interest in tech, they, it's not to say that they're not technically educated. I think they're just legislators that have different backgrounds. There are some, however, that have taken an interest in technology. And again, I'm going to make another plug. That's why folks like Sheela and myself and our peers are in Tallahassee, making sure that anything tech related, they can be informed on. So obviously, and this is not to say that legislators are not getting the education or the training that they need. I can tell you from being in the process, and Sheela can tell you from being in Tallahassee, during committee weeks, if you sit in on committee meetings, a lot of times the committee directors will have subject matter experts. These are nonpartisan folks from, different think tanks and different organizations that can come in and inform legislators about bills, inform them about particular issues. And the shout out to the committee directors, because they do a phenomenal job of making sure that legislators are informed, especially about the bills that are before their respective committees. Right. Now, again, here's a plug for South Florida Tech Hub. It's also an opportunity for this collective to help legislators where we think that there might be an opportunity. So stay tuned, make sure that you're involved with this organization, so that we can make sure that we have an opportunity to touch those legislators that we feel maybe can benefit from some of the knowledge and the expertise that we have.
Yeah, and I think just one more pointer on that, when you think of like the technical knowledge that a individual member might have, 160 members, maybe it's a doctor, right? Takes someone who's a MD, and they are now not only sitting on healthcare committees, but that individual is probably also sitting on, or in this case, the member I'm thinking of, chairing an education committee, right? Sitting on an economic development committee. And so they are directly having a say in legislation and crafting of legislation that's not necessarily their day-to-day, their 9 to 5. And that's actually a good thing, to have multiple opinions and thoughts, at the table. But Merdoche is absolutely right. There are committee staffers that are seasoned and knowledgeable and experts. Members also hear plenty of presentations. And so I will tell you, Nicholas Cardaras, which is the author of Glow Kids, who talks about the impacts of social media. He was actually in committee and presented in multiple committees as a guest of the legislature to talk about the impacts of social media from his research. And so that has led to some bills. Some of the bills that we've seen have been in response to hearing his presentation that was provided to them. And then I think, Ashton talked about, and we're coming out to the end now, but thinking about leadership, and that's a whole nother, there's so many facets to how bills become laws and what moves. And you have the 160 members that are writing legislation, but you have a governor, a speaker of the House, and a Senate president. These are your leaders
Right.
of the legislature, and they are extremely powerful, and they have priorities, right? They get elected from amongst their members. The House Speaker and the Senate President get elected amongst their members, and they have their own priorities of what they want to get accomplished, what they're going to debate and fight for, what they're going to horse trade over between the chambers. It is extremely important. Leaders wield a lot of power in this process.
No, they absolutely do. And it's 12:59. I don't know if you guys heard that alarm. I have a 1 o'clock, but I do want to touch on this because Ashton asked this question. Can you touch on how priorities of leaders such as the speaker impact session, and why it's important to be informed about who the leaders are, for the exact same reason of what Sheela just shared? They're from different geographic areas, right? In Florida, we know that Florida has some pockets of wealth. Florida is largely agricultural. We know that there's a huge, fishing and boating community on our coasts, which of course we're dealing with red algae and tide on a lot of our coasts. We're dealing with hurricanes, so resiliency. And I think I mentioned President Pasadomo. So obviously, because she is from Southwest Florida, she's going to care a lot about resiliency, a lot about the Southwest Florida community, but also communities that have been impacted by hurricanes and things like that. So for me, to Sheila's point, their respective backgrounds and where they're from and their geographic areas and their districts are absolutely going to help inform what priorities they have, in addition to their professional backgrounds. So definitely important to follow on that, because that absolutely governs how they govern and how they lead their respective chambers.
Absolutely.
And Merdoche, I know you have to run. Thank you. For anyone else that has to go as well, feel free to. I will stay on for a couple more minutes in case anyone has additional questions. But as you can tell, Sheela and Merdoche are so incredible. We are so grateful to have them on our team, and I hope you guys have taken a lot from this presentation. I know even though I'm keyed in as Director of Policy for Tech Hub, I learn from them every time. So thank you for everyone for attending on a Friday afternoon. I will stick around if anyone has any questions, but we are so grateful for the panelists and for all of you in the community as well.
Thanks, Ashton, for putting this together. I'm dropping my LinkedIn and Merdoche's LinkedIn into the chat. Feel free, anyone who wants to reach out to either one of us with any follow-up questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, if anyone has any questions, feel free to go off mute or to pop it into the chat. Give a couple of seconds here. And I will also give, if you didn't see my email address earlier. Okay, so Jean-Marie, Governor DeSantis announced a law to ban federal CBDC projects. What is your view about this? So this is something that I am personally not as familiar with to comment specifically on. This is something we can definitely take away. I can reach out to Merdoche and Sheela to comment on this. From a Tech Hub side of things, we really try to say down the line in terms of communication and not taking standpoints based on different, leaders or also to different parties. So I will be able to get back to you on this if you would like, Jean-Marie. I saw that you posted your LinkedIn in the chat, so feel free to message me or email me too. But grateful.
Because I'm still on, I was just going to say for that,
Sheela,
just something to consider is that because the governor made that announcement, I think yesterday or the day before, I haven't seen any legislation on it yet. So Governor DeSantis, unfortunately, cannot file legislation. Only legislators can file legislation. So he can come up with ideas. He can find a sponsor to support that legislation, which he does, right? He is the governor of the state and the leader of the third largest state in the union. And so many members will carry his priorities, but he himself cannot file legislation. So I know he announced this in a press conference this week. I haven't seen legislation, and it could be being amended on to another bill, which actually happens quite often. We'll see an amendment pop up, which is amending the language of a specific bill to include language that maybe is of interest to him, but haven't seen anything at this point.
Thank you so much, Sheela, for covering that. Okay. Wonderful. So I see a lot of thank yous. As I mentioned before, my emails in the chat, Sheela and Merdoche's LinkedIn's are also in the chat, but so grateful for you. If you have any policy questions, let us know. In addition to Sheila's newsletter that goes out as well, we also, as a Tech Hub, report policy issues in our newsletter as well, especially during session. It goes out every Monday. So if you are interested in that, you can find it directly on